Hello and welcome to the World Soccer Talk podcast, your weekly dose of talking about watching soccer on TV, online and apps. Coming up on episode 39, we discuss our opinions about NBC's opening weekend of Premier League coverage, as well as our thoughts on Premier League Pass, how much of an impact the Championship can have on ESPN 3, Kartik's insight regarding VAR after meeting with Howard Webb, plus news about ESPN launching a new paid streaming product. Plus, we have feedback from you, the listeners, in our Mailbag section. My name is Christopher Harris, aka The Gaffer, and I'm joined today by Kartik Krishnaiyer, co-host. How are you, Kartik?
I'm doing well, thanks.
All right, so it's been actually we skipped last week's pod partly to recharge the batteries before the big Premier League weekend, but also because we had the interviews that we had with the John Champion, Taylor Twellman, Sebastian Salazar, Hercules Gomez, and Steve Halezi. So we wanted to give the listeners a little bit of a break and also a chance to catch up on listening to those interviews. But in terms of this weekend, Kartik, so let's start off with the NBC broadcast of the Premier League. It's back now, and fifth season, and for the first weekend, they went to England. What was your thoughts overall in terms of the coverage from this past weekend?
I guess it was neat to start the season there, but as always, Robbie Mustoe, very good. Kyle Martino, very good. Robbie Earl, very good. And Lee Dixon and Graham Lusseau, a little bit different feel in the studio. Lee Dixon, always outspoken, always very on point. Same thing with Graham Lusseau. I do think, though, that it kind of came across as a promotion for the league, right? As as almost, if you will, propaganda for the league. Because I think the analysis that you saw this weekend, there were some finer points about tactical play, substitutions, maybe other sorts of mistakes. But those sorts of things were, to me, more glossed over on NBC's coverage this weekend than they were in other quarters in the written press, on Twitter, on ESPN FC, because I know there are a lot of people who are rah-rah Premier League and think it's the greatest show on earth. And from an entertainment standpoint, it very well might be. But I think the quality of play certainly deserved to be critiqued this first weekend. And it was being critiqued just about everywhere but NBC, which to me is a concern. And then I'll get into a little discussion of Arsenal versus Spurs and the perceptions of Arsenal and Spurs based on network in a little bit.
Yeah, if I could think of one word to describe NBC's broadcast from this past weekend, I'd say underwhelming. And it's tough, though, too, because we hold NBC to such high standards now that it's hard for them to continue to raise the bar and achieve more than what they've already done. So even by saying that NBC is underwhelming in comparison to, ESPN, in comparison to Fox Sports, beIN Sports, you go down the list, NBC is so far beyond in terms of the level of analysis and coverage for the most part. I mean, there's different areas that have different networks that are better than others. But it was one of those things that I think in some ways it was not a mistake. It was great to see them there for the opening weekend, but so much of the discussion, so much of the topics were centered around the transfer window that you didn't get any sharp analysis. And actually, it's the first weekend, so how much kind of really great, crystal clear analysis could you even get from the opening weekend? It's just the first games, so you're not going to get any kind of just incredible analysis where like you've done in previous seasons, where you go, wow, Kyle Martino or the two Robbies or whoever it was, they were on point on that one, and they really hit the nail on the head with some sharp analysis. So it did feel like a kind of a promotional tour, and the best example or the worst example of that, I guess, was the Manchester United game against West Ham United. And I thought Manchester United had a fantastic performance. I thought they was one of the best games I've seen them play in a long, long time. But at the same time, NBC went way over the top in terms of the praise for United in this game. And I think in many ways it was more about West Ham United, more about the opponent. I mean, West Ham looked miserable.
Well, I think comes back to my point that Manchester United were the only team that really looked good this weekend, in my opinion, by a continental European standard. Let's again look at the ability of the Premier League and Premier League clubs to compete at a high level in Europe, which they haven't been able to do the last few years. Manchester United was the only team that looked the part. Now, it is the first weekend of the season, but I think in comparison to the other, what they had seen on Friday and Saturday from the other allegedly top sides, yeah, you can go over the top with Manchester United, but there was no real perspective on it. The perspective is, look, Chelsea didn't look good. Manchester City didn't look good for 70 minutes. Arsenal was terrible, set-piece defending. Liverpool, again, blew another game. Spurs were a little bit better. Everton struggled at times until they moved Calvert-Lewin into central midfield, into kind of a central attacking position, and really played well the last 30 minutes. That's the analysis I wanted, basically, Manchester United compared to the other top sides. But I don't think there was that context that you normally get from NBC, and they have those commentators and analysts that are super sharp normally. Yeah, you're right. It was underwhelming. And again, I think it felt like a fluff propaganda promotional piece for a league that really doesn't need that kind of promotion, because they're the best at promoting themselves of any sporting league on the planet, probably.
Yeah, and that's been one of our biggest criticisms too of Fox, where they do kind of exaggerate. They do play up things. They do kind of, even if it was a boring 0-0 game, the analysis post-match was like, wow, that was a really entertaining game. I mean, soccer fans are smart enough, and the viewers are smart enough to see right through those things. And again, United did very well. It was just West Ham was so bad in this match, Kartik. And I think that what NBC is looking at in terms of trying to improve their ratings, because they know that after last year it was down about 15%. So they know that Manchester United is their best ticket to improve and increase TV viewership numbers this season. And I think they're going from this first weekend all in on United, and especially too with Saturday they got United in the game.
I guess they need to, because you mentioned the TV ratings. Their overall were down 15% last year, although Pierre Moisa was very adamant on a call we had with him last week in insisting that was kind of pre a certain time in the season, and he's right if you look at it. So the second half of the season, the ratings weren't down 15%. But NBC has had this unfortunate, as much as they've done to grow the sport and the footprint of the Premier League in this league, they've had this unfortunate coincidental timing where the year they got the ratings was the year they got the packages for the Premier League was the year Sir Alex Ferguson moved away, and the very first year Manchester United finished 7th, and it's been 7th, 4th, 5th, 6th since then. So I think they feel like they need to ride that horse, and I completely get that. At the same time, and maybe we'll get into this in a minute, but and this might be on ESPN, but the level of the analysis and the preseason expectation for two clubs in particular, Arsenal and Spurs, are so radically different between the co-commentators and studio analysts on NBC versus the studio analysts on ESPN that it's a little bit shocking, because they've come up with completely different interpretations of the same two teams, both of whom happen to play in North London. So maybe we'll get into that. Yeah,
we'll get into that in a little bit. It's one of those things that I look back at in terms of what NBC's done on previous trips to England, and part of the underwhelming aspect of this particular weekend to Kartik was that they're in massive stadiums. They're in the Emirates, they're in the Amex Stadium, and they're in Old Trafford. And in previous seasons, we've had it where they've been at Turf Moor, and you see the background of the kind of the Lancashire Hills.
Yeah.
And then you had White Hart Lane in terms of being there for just almost the last game of the season, and just that old quaint stadium too. So I think it just felt very commercialized. It just felt you didn't feel the authenticity of English soccer. The other thing, Kartik, I would say too is that I thought that Kyle Martino did a fantastic job personally as the co-commentator on that Arsenal-Leicester game. I thought he was really, really sharp on that one. I am getting tired of Arlo White. Yes, he's a great advertisement for the Premier League in terms of saying all the right things. But I thought this past weekend, Kartik, this was a a perfect example of how we were missing Steve Bauer, because I think Arlo White's pitchside studio isn't that good. I mean, it's almost kind of, when it's him and, say, Lee Dixon or Robbie Earle, it's almost like a very kind of chummy, slapstick, kind of patting on each other on the back, kind of laughing kind of situation.
Yeah.
And I miss Steve Bauer, in those situations where let's put Arlo back up in the commentary, in the gantry, but let's have Steve Bauer asking those tough questions or being a better host pitch side.
There weren't any tough questions asked this weekend. That's another thing. I mean, look, the people who think we're overly critical of Fox and in love with NBC might be very surprised to hear at least my tone, your tone too, I think, on this pod. But it was very Fox-like. I mean, I think the level of presenter, when you talk about Rebecca Lowe, she is better than Rob Stone. When you talk about Arlo White, he's better than his well, I don't think he's better than John Strong, actually, so it's a bad comparison. But the level of co-commentators, Martino, Musto, Dixon, Lasso, they're better than their counterparts on Fox. But I think the feel of it to me was very much the same. A propaganda piece, no tough questions. Hey, football's back. Hey, the season's back. I don't know how many times Rebecca Lowe said football's back. Mm-hmm. The season's back. This is a celebration. This is fantastic. This is great. Without those tough kind of questions, you're right, Steve Bauer does ask. And then I have one other quarrel with Arlo White. I like him, and I like the information he brings to a game. But he did more talking during the Brighton-Manchester City game than John Champion did during the the Derby County Sunderland game the previous week, which he called by himself without a co-commentator. Yeah. I mean, it was incredible. Now, maybe it's the first week of the season, and that was an NBC broadcast, NBC over the air. We know Arlo White in particular is conscious of whether the game is on NBC over the air, who's watching in the States. But it was almost as if the entire broadcast was like one of these podcasts, right? Someone talking the whole time.
Well, Kartik,
it was something.
I mean, that's the thing, though, too. Cause so on the Friday game, so the kickoff game, the Arsenal against Leicester, which he knows and we know it was on NBCSN. It's not on over the air, so you don't have to sell it a little bit more. You don't have to give as much backstory. You go right in. It took 1 minute and 6 seconds before the co-commentator had a word, which was Kyle. So 1 minute and 6 seconds. I mean, in 1 minute and 6 seconds in a football match, a lot can happen. I mean, there's action going on the pitch, and he's going through his whole preamble.
That happened, right? Didn't Arsenal score?
No. Well, not quite. But maybe like about 30 or 40 seconds later, yeah. But I mean, that's been a constant, and it's nothing new from Arlo White. But just in terms of this season, my patience is running thin in terms of, and he hasn't changed at all. I would like to see him change a little bit, mix things up a little bit, or NBC bring in somebody different. I'm getting a little bit tired of Arlo White after 4 years and now going into the 5th season. One more thing I would add, Kartik, is that Lee Dixon I thought was good with his analysis. He's always, for the most part, spot on. Graham Lasso, I was disappointed with. Really nothing in the studio from him.
Well, I think he's less comfortable. I kind of noticed that on Sunday also. I think his cadence and his tone is maybe less suited to the studio, and I don't think there was anything wrong with what he was saying. It was maybe the way he was presenting it. That's the old Brian McBride on Fox issue, which strangely enough, McBride was on ESPN FC last night. He doesn't have that problem on ESPN. They worked with him, obviously, at ESPN when he came over and made him more comfortable in the studio. But I think that's a studio thing, maybe. And then also, let's consider this. They took their trip on a weekend where they had a lot of auto racing bracketing their coverage. And so Goal Zone was contracted both days, Saturday and Sunday, and didn't happen at all on Friday. They had to go right out at 5 Eastern time. I think that limited what a guy like Lasso, who may be able to elaborate more on his thoughts because he's not as comfortable in the studio, he's more of a co-commentator up in the gantry, was able to do. So that was maybe another reason why calling the first week was a little bit odd, because they didn't have the kind of bumper programming. Match of the Day didn't air on Saturday. This Saturday match of the day didn't air until Sunday, right before the Spurs game, right? Or
6:30 in the morning.
Before 6:30 in the morning. So I think maybe also just their programming limitations, and we haven't seen a lot of that from NBC. Certainly, they don't have to shoehorn Premier League in the way soccer shoehorned in on Fox and on ESPN in between other sporting programs. But this weekend seemed to be one weekend that was happening.
Yeah.
And that was a problem, I think.
Well, the other thing, too, is like post-match for a lot of these matches, you get the post-match interviews with, hopefully some of the players, maybe a manager. And post-match Man United against West Ham, you had Phil Jones for a few minutes. And then NBC had to go. And they said, okay, well, we've got an interview with Romelu Lukaku, and you can see that on NBC Sports app. But we've
they
lost.
Even had the issue
you've lost it. You've lost
Friday,
the opportunity.
Craig Shakespeare coming on, having, I think, a very good chat. That was one of the high points of the weekend. And basically, Arlo White's like, it's 5 Eastern, we got to go. Wow. I know we're out of time. And that's when I didn't realize that. I thought they were going till 6, like they often do on Mondays, or 5:30 at least. And maybe, like Monday, when they've had Monday night broadcasts in the past, this was Friday night broadcast, but weeknight. And maybe there would be a Men in Blazers special or something at 5:30. I wasn't sure. And 5 o'clock, he's got Shakespeare with the three of them, and it's basically like, oh, sorry, we got to go. And I could tell from Shakespeare's reaction, he thought he was doing a longer winded interview. Maybe Leicester City won't send him out next time.
Yeah,
right?
possibly.
I think he's going to get one question or two questions, and that'll be it.
Yeah, possibly.
TVs. That wasn't good.
I missed the Telemundo coverage on Sunday with Andres Cantor. They did have Andres Cantor on pre-match for a kind of a discussion, kind of an interview with Arlo White. The Telemundo plugs for the coverage of the 2018 World Cup, quite a few of those in that interview. So they're pushing that hard.
They're pushing it hard, and that's smart. We've talked about the concerns about Fox that a lot of people have, and Contour is the greatest selling point Telemundo has, right? Even among English language dominant fans. So I think that was very smart, and it's obvious they're going to push that all season long. Contour being at Old Trafford was great, and it's interesting. I mean, we're going to get to the TV ratings in a little bit, but you're talking about Manchester United driving interest on the English side. I think West Ham United is going to drive interest on the Telemundo side because Chicharito was there this season, and we already saw a big bump in Telemundo's numbers for this game. And I think it has more to do with West Ham than Manchester United. Maybe you disagree and our listeners disagree. No, but I think that's the reason.
Yeah, my concern though, Kartik, is that with West Ham United, with that performance and Chicharito, it's a first game, but still really not contributing much at all.
Not getting any touches, really.
Yeah.
I mean, no service.
So I mean, once those players start coming back in terms of some of the from the injury, it could be that this wave could end pretty quickly if West Ham doesn't, if Chicharito doesn't perform. The other thing I would say that I thought was good was on NBC under the sports bug, so that where it has the score bug. I'm sorry, on NBC top left corner, where it has the teams and the score line. They were using that quite often more than they have done in previous seasons. So right underneath there, they'd add some facts or some information about the match itself. I thought that was good, and that was definitely a plus.
They've always been good at that sort of thing, and even showing like the form of teams and head to head and that sort of thing, historical facts. They've always been good at that, which is something that Fox still 5 years into NBC covering the Premier League and interjecting those sorts of little production bugs that we all like. They haven't picked up on. Yeah. They haven't picked up on the use of the corner, very subtle graphics, subtle storylines that drive the broadcast.
And then one more thing, Kartik, before I get you to go into your Arsenal Spurs I was going to say rant, but analysis, and that is that on Saturday I missed the Swansea Southampton game, and I'll get more into that a little bit later. But I was on the road, so I didn't get back into back home until later that afternoon, and I was already okay. I was all right. I want to watch match of the day. I want to watch Goal Zone. I want to watch highlights. What did I miss? Because I missed most of those matches on Saturday, other than the early game. And like you said before too, Kartik, the match of the day wasn't available until Sunday, and I was going through the NBC Sports Gold and the NBC Sports app, just trying to find any recaps or any highlights. There was nothing. So that was weird in terms of, I know why, in terms of the talent being there.
The highlights were all up on ESPN FC, by the way.
Yeah, well, the highlights, but I wanted to see kind of just a one program
studio stuff.
a studio, or it could be just like a Premier League review show that would just have all the Saturday, all them all together in one package where I can just watch that and catch up on everything I missed. And because the crew was in England, they weren't able to do kind of the match of the day until, I guess, the Sunday, and then the Goal Zone I don't think was on until the Sunday, or whenever it was on. But anyway, I missed all of that stuff.
So they didn't have. Oh wow! So they didn't have even the basic, even the bridge broadcast between the 3 o'clock kickoffs and the 5:30 kickoff. They didn't have that where they would have shown highlights of at least all the earlier games.
There were a couple of highlights available, so I think there were most of them, but there was bits and pieces. So it was kind of like, okay, here's a goal from well, that was a bad example, but here's a goal from one of the games, but that's just the first goal, and then I'm waiting to see, okay, what was the second goal, what was the third goal.
They did that actually during Goal Zone or Premier League Live, actually, between the games where they I was frustrated because Mooney's a player I've tipped to be good in the Premier League. That's a Football Manager legacy of mine. The guy I've often signed coming out of Liga in Football Manager, and Huddersfield signed him, so I was very excited. But they weren't showing all the goals. I mean, that was they would show one or two clips even on air. Is what I'm saying. Not just on the package, not just online, on air. And then going on, because they had an interview or they had some other feature in week one. I think, I don't know, this just wasn't, in general, as crisp as those April trips. And
in many ways, too. I mean, in the discussions that you had with Pierre Moussa last week, who's the top producer for, executive producer for NBC Sports soccer coverage of the Premier League, is that I think he was saying that they like this better because they have more time to prepare. They know what the games are. They know ahead of time. I mean, there's more preparation time rather than kind of being thrown in April. That's
what's so surprising, Chris, because I asked him that question directly, as you mentioned, and that was his explanation for why they were going the first week of the season. Obviously, they couldn't go the first week of last season because of the Olympics, but first week of this season versus the April, I think there was more lead time. There was more prep time, twice as much prep time. They knew what the games were. The storylines would be established, although, again, transfer window creates this confusion. And then the show becomes, as you mentioned, I think this is maybe one of the great takeaways that Pierre and his team need to assess for next go-around, is that if you do a show during the transfer window, if you go at the beginning of the season or you go in January, it's going to inevitably be about that more than the games. And that's, I've noticed that all summer long. ESPN FC, even during Classico week, when they're down here in South Florida, in our neck of the woods, it's 15. It's half about the game and half about, well, Neymar is going and Coutinho might go and Dembele and blah blah blah. And that's just something. I've been a long time advocate for either shutting the window before the season or just letting the window stay open until March. But until that's done, the television producers and talent that cover this sport on television are just going to have to be prepared and understand that that's going to be what drives the conversation if you're doing shows on location at games in July and August and in January. That's just the reality. And I think that takes away from the match coverage. That's why it may be better not to focus so heavily on the start of the season, not to be doing Premier League previews and picking what teams are going to finish in the top four and what teams are going to get relegated, because we still have 3 weeks left in the transfer window. Now it's 2 weeks, but at the time of these broadcasts, 3 weeks left.
Yeah, everything seemed to be just rushed. I mean, that was the thing too. I mean, with having the Premier League preview for the season as part of the pre-match for the Arsenal-Leicester game, that seemed to be rushed. And as they went through all 20 teams and talking about the Coutinho and all the different transfer speculation, it just seemed to be a very rushed preview rather than having a separate show that could focus a little bit more deeper on that. They had the SNL intro, which was kind of cute. It is what it is. I kind of laughed a little bit, but I kind of moved on quickly from that onto the actual analysis. But so, Kartik, what's your thoughts in terms of? I'm interested in hearing about the Arsenal Spurs differences in terms of the analysis.
This is really interesting. I mean, ESPN FC, they did their previews during the course of the week. They had all their pundits weigh in at various times from Wednesday to Friday, or from Tuesday to Thursday, on where they were picking teams to finish in the Premier League. And all of them, with the exception of Stuart Robson, believe it or not, because he's high on Arsenal now. Maybe it fits its narrative, because then if Wenger underwhelms, he underwhelms, right? And Robson can tee off on him. Had Arsenal outside the top 4, and most of them had them 6. And Shaka Hislop, Stevie Nicol, Alejandro Moreno, Craig Burley, really down on Arsenal, all really high on Spurs. I think both Nicol and Burley said, look, they think Spurs would win the league if they were playing at White Hart Lane this season. They're not, but various picks had them 2nd or 3rd. Someone had them 4th, but everybody had Spurs in the top 4. So I'm thinking, okay, that's a general consensus. That kind of mirrors my opinion, right? Coming into the season, Spurs are going to finish in the top 4. Spurs would win the title. I would pick them outright to win the title if they had an actual home ground this season. I know they haven't made any transfer moves, and everyone gets hung up on that, but the existing core of their team is pretty darn good, and they've got a manager who is really good and understands the team. So I buy all that. Then I watch that 2-hour preseason, pre-match, whatever you want to call it, on Friday on NBC. And everybody is picking Arsenal in the top 4 and talking up Lacazette and these moves Arsenal has made. And Kyle Martino did have Spurs in his top 4, but no one else did. And I thought, well, what's the difference here? Well, 2 things. One, the NBC team that day was completely embedded at the Emirates. And 2, ESPN had spent 2 or 3 days in Orlando with Spurs during training, and had access to Pochettino and to Hugo Lloris and Vertonghen and all their star players. So I don't know if there's a skewing of perceptions that go on if you're in a network bubble and your network has access to one club in preseason, and then the other network has access to another club as the season's starting, or if it's just the genuine beliefs of the ESPN and NBC teams. But it was shocking, just kind of the differences of opinion on Spurs and Arsenal, and then realizing that the NBC team had been on location at the Emirates, and the ESPN FC team, not all of them, some of them came here to Miami instead of going to Orlando. Everybody was in Florida that week, but and spent time with PSG and the Real Madrid and Barcelona here. But a few of the guys, Dan Thomas, Shaka Hislop, etc., were in Orlando with Pochettino. So I don't know if that skewed perceptions.
It makes me think, Kartik, of the example that ESPN gave us about Craig Burley in terms of his analysis, and when he goes to a stadium, what he does. I don't know if you remember that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I remember it well. And it is, again, I think I had a conversation, an off-the-record conversation with a journalist yesterday, so I'm not going to get too deep into this, but that this is a problem in Major League Soccer because there are so many players that are ex-players that are commentating now, whether it be for local broadcast or for a national broadcast on Fox and ESPN, whose buddies, former guys they played with or played against are all coaches or still playing in the league, and that skews analysis. Craig Burley, as we learned from Steve Police and from some of the other ESPN talent, and from John Champion, who had called a number of games with him, even back right when after Burley got into commentating 10 to 12 years ago on Setanta and ITV, basically, hey, Craig wouldn't go down into the tunnel. He wouldn't go talk to his former teammates. He wouldn't talk to these guys he was friendly with in his playing career because he felt like that skewed his analysis. And I should mention, Burley was not in Orlando. His analysis of Tottenham and Arsenal were formed without exposure to either team, we believe, this offseason, just based on how they ended last season and what he sees, right? And I think that's actually true. That's actually, it gives you a more objective perspective. I'm not saying it's a tough act, right? It's a balancing act because you don't want former players who have really good sources in the game and an ability to get a wealth of information that can help guide their analysis and inform the viewer, cut off from everybody who might do that. But from my personal perspective, I think that's a real sign of integrity integrity and objectivity how Burley conducts himself.
Absolutely. I mean, to me, it's more about Burley in just that one example, and I'm sure there's many others out there too that do the same thing. Is having more of a professional stance rather than getting involved in a kind of a personal situation where it is somebody that you know, or it's a friend, or somebody you played with or played against, and that could bias your opinion, no matter if it's commentary or analysis, whatever it may be. And there is a very cozy relationship among some analysts and talent and players, and it's knowing how to. It's a difficult road to kind of trying to balance the two.
Particularly in England, it's very much a boys' network in England.
Yeah.
And I think the ESPN FC show has tried to break through that with a guy like Burley, and then also Stuart Robson very openly on the show last season calling out, without naming the journalists, but we can all figure out who they were, print journalists in the UK that are very comfortable with Arsene Wenger and have an agenda to keep him in the job because he gives them stories, and also he's one of the last old school, I know he's not British, but he's French obviously, but old school British style managers that has this policy where he's got these reporters he talks to and feeds information to without going through the normal press channels, right? Mm-hmm. And Robson was very open in saying this is something that was in the British game for years. Wenger still abides by it, and so there are print journalists who are going to protect him regardless. The thing. Just finishing up on the Arsenal Spurs thing, I find it interesting also because last season that they went to Spurs, or was it the season before?
Last season.
Last season. Yeah. I think Robbie Mustoe made very good point on the air, and Mustoe was the one guy on the ESPN, on the NBC studio. And of course, he was with ESPN, so maybe it's good. Back to those days that, but has been as critical of Wenger as the Burleys and the Nichols and the Hislops and the Robsons, etc. But he made the point that what he saw in training from Pochettino and how Spurs worked without the ball when they lost possession was completely different to what he saw on the training ground from Arsenal when they lost possession. And that little piece of analysis, I think, is so important in guiding the Pochettino versus Wenger, Spurs versus Arsenal conversation. And for whatever reason, that didn't come back up on NBC this week, even though it was talked about at the tail end of last season. So that I found that interesting. And that sort of thing is talked about regularly on ESPN. I mean, Burley will say, hey, one of the reasons Pochettino's teams are so good is that when they lose the possession, they keep their shape. Everybody knows what their responsibility is, and they work to win back possession. Whereas with Arsenal and Burley likes to pick on Ozil, right? But it'll be like, well, Mesut Ozil, he's out of position, and Ramsey's out of position, and they don't know what they're doing, and they just are lazy, etc. But it is an informative piece of analysis in comparing those two teams.
So we've got a lot to catch up on because we missed last week's episode. So in terms of FA Community Shield, German Super Cup, Dutch Super Cup, as well as Turkish Super League, Supercopa Italiana, and Liga 1, much more. So Kartik, let's change path here and let's talk about the Championship. So the Championship has returned to ESPN3 through a deal that we talked about quite intensely in one of the previous episodes about how that deal happened. But what's been your opinion thus far about ESPN3's coverage of the Championship?
It's been good to have exposure to so many games, and I have to admit, I'll admit it right here on the air, and who knows what the case will be 3 or 4 weeks from now. I haven't bought Premier League Pass yet, and the reason I haven't paid the $50 isn't anything specific to NBC or the Premier League, but I'm English football is my football. It's what drives me more than I watch football from all over, but I'm more a fan of the English game. I have now access to 4 more games a weekend than I had previously because of ESPN3, or I should say, usually BN would show 1 game, so 3 more games, and at least to this point, that's kept me satisfied. The issue I have had thus far is there isn't a whole lot of a lead-in and lead-out time. There's no bumper program around it. I think that probably will change once we get League Cup third round. I'm assuming they'll do something if there is a Premier League versus Premier League matchup or something particularly interesting. I would have loved to have seen Burnley-Blackburn this upcoming week, that being a huge derby, some sort of coverage around that. But realistically, the expectation would be, let's say there's a draw and Everton plays Manchester United in round 3, something like that. Well, actually, they're both entering the competition in that round, so that wouldn't happen. But something like that there would be. They may move the game then to ESPNU or ESPN2 and give us some coverage of that. But the streams have been fantastic. This is something that a lot of people have told me. A lot of feedback I've gotten in the first 2 weekends of the championship is how good the streams have been. How for people who were used to having to stream BN and not getting good streams, or even not in love with the coverage on television, how crisp the streams have been, how little they cut out. Now, I would remind people that if you want a really good streaming experience with BN, you should buy Fubo or Sling. Yeah. But if you don't, I can see how ESPN3 is a big improvement, because I've heard this from about a half dozen people, how it's a huge improvement just in even the presentation, because the stream isn't cutting out, it's not dodgy, the picture quality is good, and it's like an HD experience. So that's been a very, very positive aspect. And I just think there's accessibility. There's so many networks covering sports, there's so many networks covering soccer, but there's just still an accessibility with ESPN, Fox, and NBC that as hard as BN works, as hard as they've tried in this industry, that they don't have, and just a comfort level that people have with accessing products on ESPN delivery mechanisms.
Yeah, personally, I think it's one of those things that actually, here's another example of how accessible a league is that is going to cause more problems, if anything, for MLS. You have quality streams, which I agree with you, Kartik. The quality of the streams have been great. Yes, there's been no pre-match other than just a couple of minutes from the commentator, no commercials, no halftime show, but just the raw feed, and it's been great. But also just in terms of the competition level, the games that I've seen thus far, the Sunderland Derby games and the Aston Villa games and so on and so forth. The quality of football has been fantastic. I thought it's been really very competitive, and so on two different levels, games being more accessible, having them on ESPN3, and the quality of football being, to me at least, far superior than what I've seen lately from MLS. It's a very a positive experience from the Championship. But the other thing, too, with the Championship, though, too, is going back to Premier League Pass. It is going to make a dent with that, I think. It's going to hurt the Premier League Pass, because you've got a league that is entertaining, and it fills those voids where if you want to watch... I mean, how much football can you possibly watch in a weekend?
Right,
and the issue with Premier League Pass is not so much the game coverage, because if you're a fan of, say, I don't know, West Brom, West Ham, Swansea, Crystal Palace, etc., you really have to get Premier League Pass if you want to watch your team this season, because otherwise you're going to miss out on anywhere from probably 10 to 20 games a season. So it's a must-have. But the issue with Premier League Pass I have now is, there's many issues, but one of the issues is just that how much content can you possibly watch? Because the Premier League Pass does offer a lot of the shoulder programming. They have the Premier League news. It has Fan Zone. There's so many different shows that you can watch. But at the same time, there's all these other games that you can watch too. So to me, for the most part, games will always be greater than shoulder programming. And if there's a game on, I'll watch a game. I won't watch the shoulder programming. If there's nothing on, I'll watch shoulder programming. The other challenge with Premier League Pass has been that Premier League News and the Fan Zone, which are two programs which are great, they're only shown live. So if you don't, and it's during weekday office hours, so it's kind of I think it's at 12:45 Eastern time, and then it's in the morning time too. So if you miss it live, that's it. Even with a gold subscription to the Premier League Pass, you can't watch it on demand. The games itself, the Premier League Pass, and I've written a more extensive first impressions on worldsoccertalk.com, which is on the homepage. It goes into a lot more detail. But first impressions are, in terms of the game experience, that's fine. And there's no spoilers, there's no advertising.
I hope I should just say before you get into that, I hope the executives at NBC read your piece, because it's circulated pretty widely among the people who would be the customers for Premier League Pass and who consume the Premier League on social media this week.
Yeah.
So continue.
It was interesting.
People are talking about that.
Yeah, it was interesting because a couple of points I brought up in the piece within about an hour were fixed on the NBC Sports Gold website. So I think either somebody forwarded it to them or they're reading it. But so if on the games itself, I'd say it's a necessity. Yes, I'm not happy with it not being everything that we can possibly want it to be. But if you are a fan of the lower clubs from the bottom half of the other 14 in the Premier League, it's recommended for the game side of things. For the shoulder programming, not so much so far. So again, it depends what you're buying it for. Kartik, so let's move on to talk about what else you've been watching. Anything else that stands out that you want to talk about?
Well, I wanted to watch the German Super Cup, and unfortunately, unexpectedly, it was preempted in this market on WSVN for infomercials, and didn't think to get online and watch it, and was kind of busy with other stuff, was going to be doing other stuff while I was sitting in front of the TV, so I didn't get to see it, which is unfortunate. I'm looking forward to the start of the Bundesliga season on Friday.
Hang on, Kartik. So the Dortmund Bayern game, so the reason you weren't able to watch it locally is because it was on the big Fox, and your local WSVN, local Fox
preempted it for infomercials. Yes.
Okay. And from my perspective too, Kartik, on that one, because I've cut the cords, I wasn't able to watch it on my Fox either because Fubo, Sling, and DirecTV now will only show live Fox games over the air if it's a local owned and operated Fox affiliate. So for me, I was able to watch it though through Fubo, and they had it on Fox Deportes.
Were you able to? You could always get rabbit ears for your television and watch it on Channel 29 where you live.
Exactly. But which actually I have an indoor antenna. I just have had it set up, but I've been moving things around, so I haven't had a chance to reset it up.
Which, by the way, I think I am going to do this year. I am going to get a pair of rabbit ears and hook it up to one of my televisions, one of my non-smart TVs, for these Fox games, because I'm realizing I'm probably going to have to watch them on your West Palm Beach affiliate rather than the Fort Lauderdale, Miami affiliate of Fox, which keeps preempting games. So This has been going on for years now.
But for me, though, too, I didn't miss it because I watched it on the Fox Deportes through Fubo, so I just muted the commentary and just watched it that way. So I didn't miss out, even though it was a cord cutter on that particular one. But go ahead about in terms of the Bundesliga coming up this weekend.
Yeah, so Bundesliga starts this weekend. I'm pretty excited to see Bayern and Bayer Leverkusen on Friday, and see how the league plays out. Again, we'll critique Fox's coverage. I think they've upgraded the way that they present some of these matches with Kate Abdo in the studio, etc. But we'll critique their coverage next weekend, and also, quite frankly, critique the level of play, at least from my perspective, maybe not on the show, versus the Premier League, because I was underwhelmed by what we saw week one in the Premier League, and I'm hoping the Bundesliga provides better football. Maybe it won't provide more entertaining football. It's tough to beat entertainment when guys don't mark on set pieces, right? Mm-hmm. Regularly, and you're getting free headers and goals. But I think we might see some better football in the Bundesliga, so I'm looking forward to that. Friday is the opener for Fox. I also watched the Charity Shield match on Fox, and was I guess pleased with the coverage. Now, look, I don't want to. I mean, Rob Stone has his utility, right? But gosh, I mean, it's such an upgrade with Kate Abdo in the studio for Charity Shield, for the Champions League Hoffenheim Liverpool game, which I'm sure we'll get to in a few minutes, pre-game and post-game on Tuesday of this week, in studio for these various UEFA events. I don't know what the plan is for Champions League. They're in their final year of covering Champions League, and I have to say, I was impressed. Maybe they're taking more chances because they're in the final year of their package and they're building into a World Cup, which you're covering. But they were the pregame was more extensive. They showed third round qualifying matches on FS1, FS2, and we're taping this on a Wednesday, by the way. So same thing will happen today. FS1, FS2, mm-hmm. Fox Sport Regional Networks, Fox Soccer Plus, etc. Now, is the level of analysis up to snuff compared to ESPN and NBC in the studio? No, but I think it was a little bit better with Barton Friedel and Winalda yesterday. I have to say that there was, after seeing kind of a weekend of Premier League propaganda on NBC, it was good to have Winalda debunking. Look, yeah, the English team can't mark on set pieces, although we know Waldo tends to maybe favor German clubs anyway. Right. But I thought Hoffenheim were the better team, even though they lost in that game.
The big difference, though, Kartik, the person you haven't mentioned though is Ian Joy, and to me, when Ian's on these broadcasts in the Champions League, I mean, he's able to actually pronounce the team names very well. He knows the German league inside and out. So he's a great host, and Rob Stone still to me is very smarmy, very kind of just very, I don't know, just going through the motions, and just it's too clean cut.
And they're also kind of lazy. I don't think there's much in-depth analysis when Rob Stone. This is the thing we noticed during the Confederations Cup. Also, is that we would critique. I think we've critiqued for a long time the Fox studio talent and the things they say in studio. And then you realize when Kate Abdo is hosting, the questions are a lot more pertinent to the specific match or to the specific clubs than these general kind of very lazy themes that Rob Stone tends to direct the studio team with. Oh yeah, I love Zlatan, that kind of thing. We know he loves Zlatan, but right, that's the kind of level of analysis you get. And then Ian Joy is fantastic. I agree, and I've actually made an effort to with MLS Live. Check out as many New York City FC games as possible, because I like the way Vieira is putting that team together, and then I also like listening to Ian Joy. That's another game I watched this weekend: NYCFC and LAFC with Taylor Twellman and Adrian Healy. New York City FC is, as far as MLS goes, is one of the better teams to watch. Still not like Atlanta. Atlanta is the best team to watch in that league, and I would put Atlanta up against most teams in Europe in terms of entertainment value, passing quality. I mean, again, relative to the opposition, right? They're not playing the same level of team as teams in Europe, but I think they play football very nicely. So watch that. I watched a little Liga MX this week, most notably the Atlas Club America game, where very controversial ending. There's been a theme through the years that America gets calls when they need them, and they got a really dodgy penalty at the end of this match, which was converted, and they won that game. So that was good, and obviously Supercopa. Spanish Supercopa with Seb Salazar and
Alejandro
Moreno. Right. I was about to call him Andres Moreno. Not myself.
He wishes.
But I thought the coverage was very good for that, and it was good to have. It was good to have a game on a Sunday afternoon on ESPN, right, on the mothership. Of course, unfortunately, the entire takeaway is Cristiano, and he's now been suspended for 5 games. So that was interesting, but it was. I thought, and I'll let you jump in here in a minute. I thought it was very odd. We saw those two teams in person 15 days earlier, and Real Madrid didn't start playing until the 10th or 12th minute. This was a competitive match, unlike the match in Miami, as great as El Clasico Miami was. And it just seemed like the roles were reversed. Barcelona didn't get off the bus. And it was it was surreal for me to watch it, because we had just seen these two teams play, and it play out completely differently, that match.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Plus, it's one of those things though too that I think people take they look at one match and then come to some big conclusions, which the storylines after this after the Supercopa was like, you mean Barcelona is going to Real Madrid is going to run away with the La Liga title.
Yeah, that was the ESPN FC guys, unfortunately, right? That was Stevie Nichols saying, they've lost Neymar, they can't absorb, you can't play De La Feu. I mean, it was ridiculous. It was just annoying.
Alejandro Moreno, Kartik, oh gosh, this was painful for me watching this game. I mean, the first half was very poor. The second half was very good in the first leg, but Moreno it just tries to be too cute. He said, bump, set, and spike when PK handled the ball. But not only did he say it once, he said it twice. But it's just going on and on and on. Just in terms of he just talks so much.
Hurt Gomez on this. That I was disappointed with. I heard Salazar's voice when they came on air, and I thought, okay, it's Gomez that he'd be paired with, because that seems to be a preferred pairing recently, and it was Moreno instead. He
might have been. I'm not sure, but he might have been on ESPN Deportes, and that was one of the things we picked up too when we went to Miami to interview him, is that he's the amount of coverage he does for ESPN Deportes, which I didn't realize he did that much. Maybe that's what it was, but we missed him on this English language broadcast.
We definitely missed him, right? And I would agree with you about Moreno. I've gotten used to Moreno. Maybe it's because I watch the show every day. I know what his shtick is, but yeah, he tries to be too cute on air too.
Yeah.
And again, a lot of it is buttons that are pushed by Dan Thomas and Craig Burley that kind of affect everybody's style around them. Mm-hmm. Dan Thomas is really good at pushing buttons. Actually, Salazar pushes the same buttons when he hosts, similar buttons. So I would agree with you, it was too cutesy. But the real takeaway from this is what you said. After this match on ESPN FC, in the newspapers, on the radio, it's just like, well, Real Madrid's is going to win the Champions League again, and this is one of the great teams of all time, and Barcelona is in free fall and disaster mode, and so this is one leg of a preseason cup.
Right, and that was actually one thing that Sebastian Salazar said, I think, at the tail end of that first leg, is that Real Madrid is the best team in the world right now, and probably one of the greatest teams to ever played. And I'm like, oh gosh, I mean, yes, they are very good at this moment, but I don't know, just I guess more hyperbole.
The Champions League final, it happened.
Yeah.
Real Madrid won in going away, as it turns out. But I really think Juventus was as good as Real Madrid last season, in my opinion. I mean, I was
up until the final.
When I watched the game together, I was a little stunned by what happened.
Yeah.
But I don't think Real Madrid was that heads and shoulders above Juve during the course of European campaign or the Serie A versus La Liga seasons that you could say, oh, they're clearly the best team in the world. They're one of the greatest teams of all time. Now, Juve's had some losses this summer. They may not be at the same level again and again. Juve is a big club, but they have trouble keeping some of their players at times. We've seen that in the last few years. So, but I don't know. Look, Bayern is still there. Barcelona could retool, and maybe one of the English clubs will step up, and of course PSG. Now there seems to be, and we'll get back to broadcast things in a minute, although this is really broadcast related. There seems to be a desire among a lot of analysts to ridicule PSG and to write them off in terms of competition with Real Madrid, competition with Barcelona, competition with Bayern. I just don't think that that's fair. They have Neymar now. They still have a really good existing core. They have an existing core that should have eliminated Barcelona last year. There seems to be a narrative about that second leg that ignores the fact that the officiating was dodgy, to say the least. And PSG should be in that conversation. PSG could be every bit as good as Real Madrid this season.
Yeah, absolutely, especially if they get Sanchez too.
Right.
So the PSG match, the Neymar debut, that was on beIN Sports.
Yeah,
they had Ray Hudson and Phil Shane on the commentary in that one. So, I actually watched the first half of that game. That was pretty relatively entertaining, but definitely a good atmosphere there. Also, beIN Sports, Ray Hudson and Phil Shane did the Dutch Super Cup, and that was interesting between... what was it? It was Vitesse, and who was it? Was it PSV? No, it wasn't PSV. Oh gosh, Feyenoord. Thank you, Feyenoord. And the two of them.
We have a really good team this year, by the way.
Yeah, I really enjoy watching the Dutch football whenever I see it. It's just a shame that Eredivisie still is not on US television or US streaming anywhere. But the level play was good for a final, and also with the Dutch league, it's also usually very physical. But I really enjoyed this match. Going back to the FA Community Shield, Kartik, the one thing I do want to mention is, and Fox is so guilty of this and has been for a long, long time, but really, I mean, in the post-match, so right at the end of the game, right at the final whistle, Martin Tyler kind of gives his his end speech, kind of his quick summary of the match, usually about 5 to 10 seconds in, And then Kate Abdo cuts right into the middle of a sentence and goes to talk to, I think, Warren Barton to give his analysis. And they did the same exact thing, too, with it was Mario Melchiot that went in with his analysis right before the commercial break. And then they had the trophy celebration, and just seconds after Arsenal had raised the trophy, Kate Abdo butted in and then had Warren Barton rattling on about nothing. And I absolutely hate that when they do that. No respect at all for the commentators there. And looking at that Watford-Liverpool match, that early morning kickoff on the Saturday, it was such a breath of fresh air to allow NBC Sports to let the commentary breathe and to let John Champion at the end of the match give his excellent summary. And what a difference between the two networks.
Yeah, NBC is really good at that. I mean, Rebecca Lowe doesn't chime back in until a minute, and you get the kind of the ambiance from the stadium and the feel before and after a match in particular. So I think that's a really good point. And yes, Fox has been doing that forever, right?
Yeah, since
the Fox Soccer Gen.
Yeah, Nick Webster used to butt in, and Max Bredos back in the day. I watched the Euro 2017 Women's Championship. Enjoyed that. That Dutch team was fantastic to watch. Yeah. And in the final, I thought that Jonathan Yardley had improved quite a bit since earlier this summer, where I was kind of a little bit negative on his baseball style.
You know this, I had it written down in my notebook when we interviewed the ESPN guys to ask about him specifically. I think you saw that notation, and I never did. But I think I watched this final as well, and I watched a lot of this Euro tournament on ESPN3, and I thought he was pretty good.
Yeah.
Kat Whitehill was his partner for this game, and she really helped carry him as well. So I thought it was a very good broadcast.
Absolutely.
Great game, too.
Yeah, absolutely. I watched the UEFA Super Cup and also watched Besiktas against Antalyaspor. I believe that is the pronunciation, but in the Turkish Super League, which is on beIN Sports now. Each week there's roughly about one game on, and they will be showing kind of a summary, kind of basically kind of match highlights of all the games from the league, usually about once a week. But this one at Kartik, unfortunately, I watched the first 5 minutes of the Besiktas game, and it was just so horrible to watch on beIN Sports Connect. Reason being is that Besiktas fans were recently banned from their stadium. So the entire stadium was empty except for just a small portion of away fans. But to watch that, whether it's on television or beIN Sports Connect in this example, it just sucks out all the atmosphere and all the energy from the game, and it's just like watching kind of a scrimmage. It was just a poor advertisement for the Turkish Super League, especially now that they're on the back. Actually, for the first time in a long time, they're now on US streaming. I also watched Supercopa Italiana between Juventus and Lazio on Goal TV. Most people still don't have Goal TV. I watched this one through Fubo in Spanish language. And that's about it. Kartik, anything else that you saw that you want to point out?
No, I'd love to get an update on how your cord cutting is going.
Yeah, so I mentioned the German Cup. The Super Cup. I watched that one on Fox Supporters, no problem there. The Euro 2017 final that was on ESPN2. I watched that one on Sling TV, on Sling Orange. It has both ESPN2 and also ESPN3 on there. No problem there. And so far so good. I haven't missed anything. I mean, I was able to log into the NBC Sports app using my Fubo credentials, and also tried it with the DirecTV Now credentials, and I was able to log in to see some of the highlights, what was available. Not a lot, but no problem so far. I haven't encountered any issues, but I'll be sure to update the listeners as we go through the season and see if I do experience any difficulties and if I was able to figure out a way to get around those. Now, Kartik, let's move on to TV streaming news, and not as much news this week as in previous weeks, but still some important news.
Yeah, so this item is about a week old, or more than a week old, and there's been a lot of chatter about it among MLS fans. Disney and ESPN are starting their own streaming service in 2018, according to the chairman, Mr. Iger. And there's going to be movies and films and Disney stuff on there, but there's also going to be live sports, Major League Baseball, MLS, etc. And there is a hope, and maybe this is just a hope among a lot of MLS fans, since this item came out about 10 days ago, that maybe MLS Live will be gravitated to this new streaming service. We will keep an eye on that. But that's a knock on wood, real kind of
I think it's almost a slam dunk, Kartik, because I think so. Walt Disney
extra for MLS Live as a package.
Yeah, so Walt Disney Company has now acquired a majority stake in BAMTech, and we talked about BAMTech before. They're the ones that acquired the rights to the championship and sublicensed those to ESPN to broadcast on ESPN3. So with this new venture, with this new streaming service that's going to be coming out in 2018, it's very probable that you'll have MLS Live or a lot of the MLS games available through this package. I think Kartik too. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if you have the championship through here too.
Yeah.
So, and also anything else that BAMTech picks up. So they may be looking at the FA Cup rights. They may be looking at some of these other rights. Serie A will be up soon for renewal. And you might have a package where you have to subscribe to the ESPN streaming package, whatever they call it, to be able to access most, if not all, of those games.
Yeah.
All right, so moving on. Also, in terms of some news from the TV streaming industry, last week's Match of the Day, so the first broadcast of Match of the Day on BBC in the UK on the Saturday night, had a viewing audience of 4.8 million people. And for those listeners who are not familiar with the show, it's a highlights package. That's all it is for the day's games that are played in the Premier League. And for most people in the UK, this is the only way to see coverage of their games, because most of the games are not on television. So 4.8 million for BBC.
Yeah, so the world's biggest football clubs rethink Facebook Live. This is actually applied to some other smaller clubs here in the States. So various clubs, when Facebook Live was launched a year ago, I can speak to this because we did the same thing with Fort Lauderdale Strikers. You sign contracts with Facebook for exclusive post-match, pre-game, extra content, right? That you pushed out via Facebook Live exclusively. Previously, you had done it via YouTube or Periscope or whatever Ustream. And the contracts varied in length from 6 months. Our contract was like 3 months, but 6 months to a year. Now, according to Dig-A-Day, and this was published in late July, none of the big clubs, Manchester United, Real Madrid, et cetera, that had gone through this process renewed with Facebook Live. And now we're looking to push out this content via alternative mechanisms, whether it be Instagram or in-house channels or YouTube, going back to YouTube, et cetera. So that's a pretty big loss for Facebook, you'd think, but it came down to money and fees, and really also accessibility. I think one thing with Facebook Live that I found is that unless you're specifically looking for something, like when there's a Liga MX game on Facebook Live, I know I'm specifically looking for that, right?
Right.
And I do a search and I find it. It is impossible to find things. So the numbers were not as high as people thought they would be. Now, of course, Instagram is actually owned by Facebook, so it's just kind of reshuffling. It's like a shell game there. But if this stuff gravitates to YouTube or gravitates to other mechanisms, in-house productions for these major clubs' television channels, that's a big loss in content potentially for Facebook.
Yeah, I agree with you, Kartik, about Facebook, and discoverability is very poor in terms of if you're... I mean, I didn't even realize most of this stuff existed on Facebook. I mean, I'm on Facebook. But, for example, Barcelona... So the way it worked, and one of the reasons why that a lot of these clubs are moving away from Facebook now and looking at YouTube or Instagram, etc., is that for the most part, most of the clubs were being paid by Facebook. So in the example of FC Barcelona... They got paid $1 million for 10 months of posting videos to Facebook Live. And these are not match videos. These are just, kind of clips of the players, walking to training or a couple of interviews here and there, but exclusive coverage of FC Barcelona, $1 million. Now that Facebook has decided to not offer the cash incentives to many of these clubs, now all of a sudden a lot of these clubs are looking at YouTube and other places to go ahead and post their content. So I think in some ways it's a little bit of both. It's a little bit of Facebook having poor discoverability and letting people know that this video programming is available, but also to the clubs being kind of greedy and saying, okay, well, if they're not paying us, $500,000 or whatever it may be, then we're going to move someplace else and go to YouTube and post them there and try to build an audience there. I think the other thing, too, is that with Facebook having so many users, well over 1 billion users worldwide, the number of views that a lot of these clubs were expecting were probably much greater than what they got. But still, it's... they have to be kind of, you would think, reasonable about the number of views that they could get. It's not going to be, in the hundreds of millions. It's going to be much, much smaller than that. So, Kartik, let's move on now to TV ratings. So, a lot to talk about this week. The biggest number that's come out on worldsoccertalk.com, and we'll have all the other numbers too in detail on the websites in the next day or two. But the big number is for Man United against West Ham. That was 1.02 million people watched this game on NBCSN and Telemundo combined. The number for NBCSN was 680,000, and then the number for the Telemundo part of it was 340, roughly. But all in all, 1.02 million for that one.
Yeah, it was a very good number, and I mentioned earlier in the show, I think West Ham, at least initially in the season, will drive a lot of that Spanish language number. Now, the game that was on the previous day on NBC over the air and on Universo, which aired at 12:30 Eastern Time, got a similar number. It's funny how psychologically we're trained. If something is right over 1 million, we think it's a great number. If it's under 1 million, we're thinking, it's not so great. But that actually had about 990,000 viewers, an average of 990,000 viewers, so only basically the same number. So two good numbers to start the season for NBC.
Yeah, but in some ways, though, too, if you compare apples to apples and look at, say, Brighton Man City, which had on the English language over the air, NBC was 910,000 people, and then compare that to the first game that the Premier League, the NBC showed last season on over the air, which was Man United against Hull City. Well, actually, it was Hull against Man United. That one had over, I think it was 1.1 million people there. So the number of viewers for the Brighton Man City game was down about 245,000 viewers. But at the same time, though, Kartik, I mean, you're a City supporter, but I mean, Man United is a much bigger club in the States and is always going to get a bigger number, at least for the time being.
Right, but of course, when you have two big clubs playing each other, it drives things as well. So let's compare the NBC SN number on Sunday to Arsenal-Liverpool last season, which was, again, I think there were a lot of complaints. Fixtures are random. They're done by a machine. And Arsenal played Liverpool and spit that out for very first match day, which I think was a difficult way for both clubs to start. It was great for Liverpool. And that game actually ended up being the difference between the two clubs at the end of the season, who got into the Champions League and who didn't. But Liverpool won that match 4-3, remember, and they had 745,000 viewers versus the 680 for this match. Yep. Again, I think it was two big clubs, and it was the middle of the Olympics, because we saw that even with some of the other matches this week, where the numbers on cable were down because the first weekend last season was in the middle of the Olympics, was being hyped during Olympic coverage, and you and I have talked for 4 years about the Swansea-Cardiff game in 2014 that got this huge bump because it was on right after Olympic coverage.
No. It was because it was Swansea, Kartik. That's the only reason. In some of the other numbers, so actually for the Premier League, those two games got the biggest numbers for the entire weekend of any soccer game on US television. Next came Monterrey against Chivas on Univision and Univision Deportes Network combined for 829,000 viewers. The Spanish Supercopa first leg had 570,000 viewers on ESPN. Chelsea Burnley had 482,000 viewers. Newcastle Spurs, 408,000 viewers there. And some of the other numbers, so the Breakers against the Spirit NWSL game on Lifetime had 80,000 viewers, which is a little bit less than what they've been getting lately. The really low number, the embarrassing number this week, I think, Kartik, was LA Galaxy against NYCFC on ESPN2 on Saturday. It was a late kickoff. It was 11 o'clock Eastern time, which is 8 Pacific. I mean, so prime time Pacific. Yeah. And that one had 73,000 viewers.
Right, I watched that game, but I guess I was one of the few. And that's, again, I'm kind of heartened by that rating, to be honest with you, because I've had this long-running feud, if you will, with other people who are in the media in this country, who cover Major League Soccer, who say, well, the way to drive ratings up are to have strong LA and New York teams and have them on television constantly. And I've always said I think people go for the ambiance, show Seattle and Portland as much as possible now, or show Orlando as much as possible, show Atlanta as much as possible. And you'll notice I don't think there's been a single Atlanta United game that's had that kind of embarrassing number when they've been on national television all season, or Seattle games. So I think, again, it proves my point.
Okay, so speaking of MLS, let's move on to listener mailbag, and we have a letter. Actually, it's a tweet. It was a long tweet, but we copy and pasted it into here. It's from the Soccer Heretic, and he says, I disagree with points and responses pertaining to the letter read on the August 3rd John Champion Taylor Twellman episode. I realize some tell-all people to avoid MLS because you're complicit. I don't. If you live within 90 minutes of an MLS stadium and that's your cup of tea, more power to you.
By the way, he is referring to some of the pro-rel advocates, and Soccer Heretic is a pro-rel advocate, and he's a reasonable one. And there are most of them are reasonable, but there are a few that are out there. We won't name names that say, well, if you're even watching MLS or talking about MLS or going to a game, you're complicit and you're part of a cartel, etc. So you're not allowed to watch soccer in your town if you have an MLS team. So that's what he's referring to.
Okay, and then he continues. He says, I tell people from places like Oklahoma City, Omaha, Wichita, New Orleans, etc., supporting MLS is not in your best interest because, frankly, it isn't. I disagree. What MLS has done for U.S. soccer is wholly positive. It's done great things for roughly 20 individual communities within America, but intentionally harms those outside of those communities as a rule of practice. Number one, 20 to 30 communities does not represent the whole of America or American soccer. Number two, continuing to use the original NASL failure as a boogeyman is intellectually dishonest. The original NASL failed before the proliferation of cable television and the internet. It failed when there were fewer than 30 cities with 1 million residents. There are now more cities with more than 1 million metro residents than there were even with 750,000 in 1985. Number three, considering MLS games competitive and entertaining is a matter of opinion. Many might consider results random and regular season meaningless. Number four, MLS's business model isn't successful by any measuring stick. They admit to massive financial losses. TV numbers have stagnated for years now, and the pod recognizes this by referencing local failures in ratings. People outside of the communities playing don't watch the matches, even other MLS fans. Once again, I don't think that people in MLS cities... I don't people in MLS cities to not follow their local team if that's what they choose. Maybe I don't prevent or I don't stop people in MLS cities.
He doesn't. He's not saying people in MLS cities shouldn't watch their own team,
right.
Community team.
And he says, but for myself, not living in an MLS city or even reasonably close to one, I have no reason to watch it. I'm not depriving myself of anything. I can watch upwards of 30 matches from around the world any given weekend around the year, League Cups. Leagues, international matches, tournaments, etc. There is an absolutely wealth of soccer available to anyone who seeks it out, and mostly from competitions you can find a lot more easily to follow. The Premier League Pass is cheaper with better content than the MLS Live platform. There are also still more free matches through NBC network of networks there. All right, Kartik, a lot to take in there. What's your initial thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I tend to agree with him on most of these points. I think what MLS has done is it's segregated cities that have Major League Soccer from those that have, quote, minor league teams or lower league teams as weaker soccer markets. And I think what you've seen is the market respond with people outside of those markets. And those markets, until this year, included Atlanta, the place with the world's busiest airport, a place that hosted the Summer Olympics. It still, as of this moment, includes Miami, which is the center of the fourth largest urban area in the country, if you use urban areas rather than MSAs to determine size of places. What it's done is segregated people in those places away from Major League Soccer and said, well, Columbus is a major league city, but Atlanta until 2016 or 2017 is not. Right? So right. That I think it's turned a lot of people in those large markets towards other soccer viewing options and segregated based on that. I agree on the point on the NASL. I would add another layer to this. And I think MLS had to battle this initially as well. There was and still is a bit of lingering hostility towards the sport among journalists, among sports media, non-soccer media, among lay Americans, if you will. And I think the NASL, once things began to go down the chutes in 1980 and 81, culminating with the league's collapse in 1984, that was a big part of it, and Americans not being sophisticated about the sport, not knowing how to broadcast the sport, not knowing how to film a soccer game. All of those sorts of things played into it. That played into the initial, I think, problems MLS had. MLS almost went out of business in 2001, as we know, was an hour away from being wound up, and that had a lot to do with the hostility and the way games were broadcast and commercial breaks and all these odd things, clock counting down, etc. So I think that's a big part of it. 3, considering MLS games competitive entertaining is a matter of opinion. I think that is correct. I think he's right about the results being random and the regular season being largely meaningless. I do think there are a lot of quality games in MLS. There's more quality in the league than its critics give it credit for, but there are also some real stinkers, and there's also, I think, overall, even when there's a quality game, the game may not mean very much, right? It's entertaining, but the game has no context. Right. MLS business model isn't successful by any measuring stick. We'll let people like Stefan Szymanski chime in on that.
Hey, Kartik. Yeah, but to me, I just want to chime in here. I think there's 2 MLSs. I think there's the MLS that is in your local market, which if you have that team, I mean, you should be very thankful because, I mean, it's great to have local soccer. And then there's the MLS on TV. Now, the MLS in your local market, the nearest team to me is 3 hours away. It's been 16 years since I've had a team that's been nearby. I would love to have an MLS team in my market where I could take my wife and kids and go for a Saturday night entertainment and watch the match, have a great night out. That does not exist. So for me, MLS is on television, and going back to what the Soccer Heretic says, I mean, soccer fans, sports fans are a lot more sophisticated now. There's more choice of any leagues from around the world than there's ever been. You name it. I mean, there's absolutely almost every league is available. And the level of competition and the level of entertainment value watching those leagues, MLS kind of ends up maybe, I don't know, 6th or 7th in that top 10 table.
I think this is important, too, because there's so much football on that the viewing audience is more sophisticated, and I think a lot of people around MLS and a lot of the apologists that make excuses for the league and for U.S. soccer in general. I mean, I think this Soccer Heretic, I think, disagrees with me on this, but I extend this to the U.S. men's national team. I actually think MLS is more entertaining than watching that garbage product that the U.S. Soccer Federation puts out as a national team, and then you have journalists who feel like they have to wave the flag for the U.S. Just kind of overselling what the product, but I think that there is a sophistication among the audience because there's so many games that are on where you can watch a match and say, well, this isn't entertaining, or this doesn't have any meaning, or this is just not very good. And that includes, you say that there are two MLSs, that includes people in MLS markets. I've said this over and over again on this pod. There were so many people I know in MLS markets that watch their club, love their club because it is their local club. Like I worked for an NASL club and worked for the league, and my local club was an NASL club. and same thing for people who have USL clubs, etc. But then they don't watch the league other than that because they don't find the league entertaining. They're bonded to their local club just the way a supporter in England would be bonded to a League One club or a League Two club. Some folks in Lancashire are bonded to Bolton or Accrington Stanley or Preston North End, but they're not watching the league as a whole because they're not entertained by it. And at the end of the day, most of the teams make the playoffs. And if you don't make the playoffs, and if you're not very good, there's no need to watch any other matches, right? So, because you're not going to get relegated. You're not watching other teams. You're not competing with other teams. Right. So, I think that also impacts it.
Well, plus when we spoke to Taylor Twellman, a couple of weeks ago now too, he says, you guys know it, I know it, but the MLS season doesn't start until August. That is when kind of it really heats up in terms of like teams going for the playoffs, trying to make it. So you've got March through like almost 6 months, 5 months of the season, which is practically meaningless. That really has no narrative to really a big reason to watch it. Now, if those teams were in my area and I had a team locally, then yeah, I would go to those games.
The other thing is that MLS has an excessive number of player moves in the middle of the season compared to other leagues. It's like, let's just, for Premier League fans, let's say it's a January transfer window and each team is moving out 3 or 4 or 5 guys and taking in 3 or 4 or 5 guys, and those guys are all playing. Mm-hmm. Now think about that. Why would you be engaged in a team from August to Boxing Day or to New Year's if 4 or 5 of your contributors are going to leave? And there's just so much player movement within Major League Soccer in the middle of the season. But it's ridiculous.
Well, it's not even the middle of the season, though, Kartik. We're near the end of the season. It'd be like in the Premier League if it was...
Well, because they have to align their windows. Because it's the European window now. So that's,
that's another issue. But it'd be like in the Premier League having the transfer window happening in March. And then all of a sudden, those moves that you make in March are going to have big implications on April or May in terms of where the club stays.
This is why I'm big on Pro-Rel also, but I've told Pro-Rel advocates, woe down, there are other issues, including, to me, calendar. Calendar is maybe even a bigger issue than promotion and relegation. MLS teams were making moves up until, 3 days ago? Mm-hmm. And it's the end of their season. You're correct. There is a window that shuts eventually, a secondary, or would be yesterday, would have been the 15th. The MLS, what would be the equivalent of the January window, closes on August 15th, but that runs until August 15th because it's meant to align with the European transfer window as much as it can. And unfortunately, that means you've got player movement in what would be the equivalent of March 30th in the Bundesliga or the Premier League. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the issue that MLS has is that, again, local markets is fantastic, but it's such a big country that it's almost impossible to serve, the entire nation with local soccer. So the current system is broken, in my estimation. And then on the television side, you had Don Garber, 3 or 4 years ago, complaining that there's too much soccer on television. And that, to me, the amount of soccer that we can watch or choose to watch, that is MLS's number one enemy, really, because that's what's holding the league back in terms of the TV ratings, is that people have so much choice, they're making choices elsewhere than MLS. All right, Kartik, let's move on to our featured topic of the week, and that is regarding a conversation you had with Howard Webb recently, talking about how MLS is using VAR differently than other leagues and other than FIFA, actually, too, around the world. So the Bundesliga's using it, FIFA's been using it for the Confederations Cup, and we've seen it kind of slowly... That's right, and the Dutch League too. So what did you learn, and what can you share with our listeners in terms of what we need to understand about this, and what may be some of the impact or implications on the television experience?
We just got done kind of beating up on MLS, but I want to thank Major League Soccer for inviting me to a seminar with Howard Webb, where he walked through VAR and went down to that and had about 3 hours of teaching from Howard Webb, and then some one-on-one conversations. I had a long one-on-one conversation with him afterward, and it was very, very revealing, very educational for me, not just from a covering television and covering MLS standpoint or covering world football, but also just from a refereeing standpoint and understanding the art of refereeing from the best in the business, right? Or the best in the business recently until he retired as a referee. So for those of you who don't know, who are Premier League fans and may not watch Major League Soccer, Howard Webb has moved here to the States and is running the VAR program in U.S. soccer, and it was implemented first in USL on a trial basis in the latter part of 2016. The first game actually done was between two MLS reserve teams, Orlando City V and New York Red Bulls 2, and then on into Major League Soccer as of 2 weeks ago. We've only had 2 match days of this VAR being fully implemented, which kind of, again, coincided with the launch of it in Germany and the Dutch league. Another reason why calendars being misaligned are a bit of an issue, because I'm sure MLS would have liked to have started at the beginning of the season, but Webb didn't think that they were ready and wanted to go through the process. And they actually VAR'd most of the regular season games this season. This is an interesting point coming into the actual launch of it, but they didn't implement it during the games, right? But they had the officials reviewing and going through the process. Now, this one of the things that was really apparent from this conversation and the seminar was that Webb has watched the Confederations Cup. He spent time in Germany. He spent time with IFAB. Obviously, we all know he's ref World Cup finals and Euro finals and was the best Premier League official for many years. Having a referee in charge of this program kind of changes the perspective. So his default position, which will be the default position in all MLS games, is that the on-field decision by the referee is correct, Chris. So that right there takes out some of the confusion and some of the elongated stoppages you're going to have, which might push a game to 2 hours and 5 minutes and outside a broadcast window. And I think maybe part of this is, I'm not sure how it works in Europe, although I think broadcasters are probably as finicky about it, right? In Europe, where you want to fit these soccer matches, football matches within a 2-hour window, right? You don't want people maybe even DVRing the match and it's still stoppage time and their DVR ends, and then it bumps the next program. So I think that's one of the considerations, which I have to say as a viewer and as someone who analyzes the sport, I appreciate. Webb said on average they check 9 moves a match with VAR, but they're only reviewing 0.36 per match based on their test phase, which, as I said, ran until about 2 weeks ago. So on average, less than 1 review a game. 1 review a game. There are 9 reviews a game, but 1 stoppage a game, which I think is different than what we're seeing in Holland and Germany. They're sending their feedback to IFAB every week. They've got more cameras for national games than for regional telecasts, so there's more to watch and more to kind of analyze. This is important. He said that if there are 2 camera angles and you don't have conclusive evidence from those 2 camera angles, he's instructed his officials to not go beyond that. So we're not going to have one of these situations, and I think we see this in American sports, where there's 8 camera angles and the referees are watching all 8 and then talking amongst themselves. He doesn't want that. And then another thing that's important is that, and Webb was kind of honest with this to me, is that there will be a situation where perhaps player behavior changes. This is an unintended consequence because MLS, unlike what we saw in the Confederations Cup and how it may be implemented in the Bundesliga, once a play is over, if the referee doesn't stop and review, let's say when there's a dead ball and the opposing team takes a throw in or takes a quick free kick, that's done. They're not going to go back and stop the game and review it. And, of course, we saw in the Confederations Cup confusion about that, right? So Webb conceded to us that maybe it'll change player behavior. Guys who, if there was a free kick incorrectly awarded in players' minds, maybe they take a quick free kick instead of setting up and trying to put a shot on target. Maybe they play a quick ball just to get on with the play. So that's going to limit the stoppages also. We'll talk a little bit more about specifics about bookings and stuff in a minute, but I want to say that I've been a skeptic of VAR, and of course Howard Webb is the best in the business, so I guess if anyone's going to turn your head, maybe it would be him. But I will from the presentation, I really have a lot of confidence that we might see it implemented differently in Major League Soccer, and that we're seeing it implemented differently in Major League Soccer without some of the problems we saw during the Confederations Cup. And I had mentioned that during our Confederations Cup podcast during that period that I held out hope that MLS would get this right. Week 1 went very well. We have to mention in week 2 there was this bizarre call when Kaká put his arm around Aurelien Collin, who used to play with him for Orlando City, now plays for New York Red Bulls, in kind of a playful manner at the end of the match, in like the 94th minute, stoppage time. New York is winning the game 3-1. Game is basically over, where they send Kaká off. Now, you could say, well, if you put your hand around the player, you raise your hands, you're putting yourself in jeopardy. But this, to me, was a red flag because one of the things Webb talked about with our group, and then with me personally after, is that the default position for him is the referee's position on the field, because they get the feel of the game, they get the circumstances, they understand that. If you have guys, replay officials in a truck, on site, but in a truck, and actually in Germany they're not on site, they're in a central location in Cologne, but they don't quite get the feel. And the feel of that game was that was a playful moment from Kaká. He got given a red card by the replay official or by the VAR, by the video assistant referee, and will miss Orlando's game against Columbus this weekend. So that was a red flag for me, but I have faith that that's a teaching moment. Howard Webb's going to go back and talk to that VAR, and tell him, don't do that again. Yeah,
I think that one was more of a common sense thing, and I think it's one of those things that if the guys in the truck went through the rule book and said, okay, hand on face contact is a red card. Like, see, it says that, and meanwhile, Kaká, it was just a playful put his hand in his face, kind of just messing around type of thing. So there's going to be mistakes that happen, and I think. Hopefully, I'm sure those will be corrected in the future in terms of minimizing those as much as possible.
Yeah, I think something that Webb spent a lot of time with us explaining, because there was confusion about this, and this is important for every viewer who watches these games at home. After a reversal of a call, let's say there's an offside call, and then after that there's a dive, and there's a penalty, and that's wrongly awarded, and there are cards issued. Those cards are rescinded, and everything that happens after is rescinded, with the exception of unsporting behavior. So if a player goes and shoves a referee and gets a red card, he's still getting the red card. That's not being rescinded. Okay. After the foul, or if there's some gets in the referee's face and gets a yellow, that's not being rescinded. So they will rescind tactical fouls, if you want to call it that, but they will not rescind unsporting behavior, which is another way of protecting the referees, right? And
so Kartik, what happens? So in the Dutch Super Cup, there was, and actually Phil Shane pointed this out in real time, which he did a fantastic job of doing it. But what happened was that one of the teams had an incident in the penalty box that wasn't called. So was it a foul? Was it not a foul? The play continued. The other team went all the way to the other end of the pitch and scored a goal, but then that one was called offside. And then the referee came in with a video assistant referee, and he went back to the penalty decision and actually overruled his decision and called a penalty because there was a foul on the incident. But what would have happened, and actually Phil Shane pointed this out too, what would have happened if the other team had gone back and had scored the goal but it wasn't offside? Where does the whistle blow? I mean, where do you stop and do you take the goal back?
So this is the different interpretation here. No, you don't take the goal back. Howard Webb made it very clear that they consider, quote, the start of an attacking move is how he defined it. So in this case, Vitesse, a player, was fouled in the penalty area. They're aggrieved. He actually showed us a slide that demonstrated this, which was, I think, from a Premier League game, actually, if I remember. That was a different slide. There was a slide he showed us from a Man City Swansea game, which both you and I would appreciate. Maybe you wouldn't have appreciated it as much because it was a City goal. But this, I think, may have been from, maybe it was from a Dutch game. But basically where there's a situation where there should have been a penalty awarded, but when the ball is cleared, that's the start of a new attacking move. Okay?
Yeah.
So the replay official, once that's not called, the replay official under Howard Webb's direction in Major League Soccer can only review from the point where that attacking move begins. What he has clearly defined as an attacking move. So in this case, they would not go back and do that.
I guess the challenge.
And maybe people will not like that because they'll say, well, then you're not getting all the calls right. But it's again an issue of viewability and flow of the game that he's concerned about.
I guess the challenge, though, to Kartik is consistency. So if MLS has a certain way of using VAR, then you've got the Eredivisie, then you've got the Bundesliga, then you've got FIFA. I would hope that all of them would be consistent across all of those technologies, so that otherwise the viewer is going to be even more.
And they're not right. They're absolutely not right now. I think. The way Howard Webb views it is that this is a work in progress. These are the first 3 large leagues that are implementing it. FIFA did it for the Confederations Cup. They're going to they have a year of input from these 3 leagues. As he said, we're sending everything to IFAB every week to create a template for the World Cup. And perhaps starting with the World Cup in 2018, there'll be a consistent way this is implemented across the board, and as more leagues implement VAR. But for Howard Webb, it's very much, and those of you who've watched English football for years know how he referees a match and how he would take control of a match. The interpretations I heard in that room from him were very much his interpretations of how he officiated games, and he's passing that on to VAR. So MLS's implementation of VAR will look very much like the way Howard Webb officiated matches, which is to let matches breathe. They're not going to be constant reviews and constant stoppages. Now, in Germany, it appears like it might be different. So reconciling those two things, I have faith will happen at some point. And I think that the Webb MLS model is better, at least from where I sit. But yes, it will be inconsistent right now. If you're watching an MLS game on a Saturday evening and then you're watching Bundesliga Sunday morning, you might see differences. You will see differences in how this is implemented.
But that's a great point, Kartik, too, especially for TV viewers and those watching online streaming too, is that we're going to have to get up to speed on the different technologies in terms of how they're interpreted in these different leagues and competitions, so that we as soccer fans know which kind of set of rules that they're using. So a little bit of education on our side, and I'm sure the TV broadcasters will do that.
So this is an important point. The Swansea Manchester City game we were talking about was a goal that was scored by David Silva, where Aguero appeared to have crossed the end line. And he didn't cross the end line, so basically they would review that, and or the ball wasn't entirely over the goal line when Aguero played the ball back to Silva and Silva scored. So that review would be a goal for Manchester City. So that was the talking point from that game. But so what Webb did is he went through these various scenarios, had clips from different leagues, mostly MLS, but stuff from Germany and England, and we had one or two from Italy that we went through, and kind of he taught us how the referee would handle this. And one of them was like that Dutch Super Cup, where basically, sorry, there should have been a free kick here, but this is the start of a new attacking move. This team might feel aggrieved, but the way we're interpreting it in our league is that play is over. Replay official, review official, you can only take from this point forward.
Which is challenging though too, because that one in that Super Cup was such a fast breakaway. It was kind of the penalty incident happened, and within like 2 seconds, the ball was already down towards the end of the pitch, and they had scored the goal, which had been called offside. So it doesn't give a lot of time. I mean, the challenge with this one, Kartik, is that in certain situations you could have a riot. I mean, if you mean in terms of key decisions where it could go against the home team. In some ways, there's a lot more pressure on the match referees in this one to get it right, with no excuses. But I don't know. It's a different. I mean, it's not going to happen all the time in this scenario. But I think they have to be careful about kind of how this is implemented, because I could see situations where fans getting extremely upset or feeling it is unfair. But
and Webb conceded that there were going to be fans that would still feel like there was injustice, and unfortunately for those fans, the way he has decided to implement it in Major League Soccer. We're going to get more of the calls right, but we're not going to get them all. We're not going to be able to review everything and get them all right. Now, it's possible a year from now, FIFA will say, "Hey, we like the way that it's being done somewhere else, and you need to go back and review that." And we're going to end up having 2.5 hour games, but which I don't think most viewers want. Although there are fans that seem to want replays for everything, right? There are those out there that want to review every call, but the way Webb is viewing this, I think, very much is that he wants the game to breathe. He wants the games to flow. He wants to keep this minimal and just use it in specific cases where it is an additional tool for the officials, but it doesn't become the game itself, which is unfortunately what we saw happen in New Zealand, Mexico, and to a certain extent Germany, Chile in the Confederations Cup.
Yeah. So I'm going to play devil's advocate on this one, Kartik. So in terms of MLS's VAR strategy, first question I have is, what about goal line technology? Why hasn't goal line technology been implemented when this has?
That's a really good question. Why they haven't done something that I think is probably cheaper. I mean, I don't know. I don't know the economics. I'm assuming goal line technology is probably cheaper to implement than this. But that's a good. It's quicker.
Yeah, it may end up being that actually the goal line technology is more expensive. The estimates I heard was, I think, $250,000 per stadium. And then in terms of this program, other than kind of, you don't need a lot of technology on this one. I would think it's more about man hours, and man hours probably not that expensive for kind of these referees sitting in a truck reviewing stuff.
That's true. But one thing Howard Webb mentioned, and I can attest to this because I've had these frustrations working in the game in this country, that he feels like the officials in this country have not got enough high level games. A lot of them are doing 30 NASL or USL games before they get to MLS, and the guys in the VAR truck even less, and that they're doing mostly college and semi-pro games, local games, and that's he wants to get a situation where you have enough experienced officials to do both of these functions at a high level, and we're not there yet. So it is manpower, and it is maybe manpower that isn't as well qualified as we would hope they would be, but they'll get there.
Yeah, I still think that MLS should have goal line technology, and I believe it's coming at some point in the future. But still, to my estimation, I mean, they're behind the 8 ball on this one, and they're ahead of the 8 ball on the actual.
Well, I have VAR. To say though, when it comes to this is an interesting dynamic, because watching after the Premier League implemented goal line technology in 2013, it became pretty tough to watch Major League Soccer, and for a little while, UEFA competitions when because they didn't have this kind of just this reassurance in your mind. Now that MLS has VAR, I don't know how that's going to affect my Premier League viewing at times. And I will tell you, for NASL, who's not part of this program, it's going to be very difficult because there are a lot of complaints about the officials in NASL. Some of them are the very same officials that we have in Major League Soccer, and there's this effective kind of check of accountability in MLS that there isn't in NASL. So I think VAR, goal line technology, it affects how you, a viewer, also perceive what league you want to watch and what league you have confidence in. And not having goal line technology did impact my confidence in MLS, and in times my willingness to watch MLS, honestly. Yeah,
mine too, in terms of just feeling that, when a team's got cheated out of a goal, it's like, this is not fair. I mean, this is a representation of the league itself.
There have been some in MLS, some really bad calls on that front in the last few years where
Orlando, I can think of a few.
Yeah, the Orlando game I remember with the ball was the Orlando-Philly game, where Philly got absolutely robbed in that game. That was last season. I was at that game. But yeah, there've been several examples like that.
So why can't Howard Webb's team use VAR for goal line technology?
I want to be careful how I say this. I get the impression they might.
Really?
Yeah, I get the impression that those are reviewable. That it hasn't come up yet in the first 2 weeks, but that they would be reviewable. But again, reviewing it still it denotes a stoppage of time. Mm-hmm. And in the Premier League, you have a chip that goes off. So it's not the same thing. But yeah, I think the impression I got, and maybe we'll find this different in a couple of weeks, the impression I got is that it will be, those very well could be reviewed. Okay.
And not to put you on the spot, Kartik, but I wasn't invited to this Howard Webb symposium, so I'm asking you the questions, which are tough. But my last question, Kartik, is why is this called VR? Why isn't this called VAR? To add more complication to all the acronyms that are out there, VR to me says virtual reality. It doesn't say video review.
I don't know, because we have what we've done in Major League Soccer and in NASL and the USL, and this was an implementation of Peter Walton, another former Premier League official. He had all of our linesmen, they were called linesmen and lineswomen, renamed as ARs in the US. I don't believe are they in Britain? Are they called
assistant referees? Yeah,
they are called ARs. Also.
Well, it'd be assistant referees, but I mean, the US loves to use acronyms, but they're assistant referees, right?
So I think the confusion between AR and VAR might be the reason for that. Yeah,
that's definitely plausible. That definitely makes sense. All right, Kartik, anything else before we wrap up here?
No, that's about it. I mean, I have to say my faith in this, I have a lot of faith in Howard Webb. I know Premier League fans love to beat up on him, particularly fans of Liverpool who seem to think he was a Manchester United was a Manchester United fan, which I can assure you he's not. Yeah. But I have a lot of faith in him, and the presentation reassured me. And I think the reason Major League Soccer invited me was that I had been a skeptic on this show and very publicly in social media and in articles I've written. So I appreciate the invite from MLS, and they knew he was a guy to help turn me around. But I like the direction they're going, MLS. But again, you're the most important point that we probably made in this discussion is what you said, the consistency between leagues. And there is no guarantee that the Howard Webb vision for VR or VAR will be the way it's implemented across the board 2-3 years from now. It might be a completely different interpretation. We're having constant stoppages, where we're going back and we're reviewing plays after another goal was scored and taking that goal away and going and re-legislating the whole game, which Howard Webb made very clear he does not want, and that's not how it's going to be implemented in Major League Soccer, not how it's being implemented, but maybe that's where we end up going, because fans are never going to be satisfied, and they're going to say, well, now that we have video replay, why did this happen or why did that happen? And there's still a sense of injustice. Mm-hmm. My view, Chris, and I think you agree with this, is if we take the human subjective part out of officiating and we make everything robotic, there's a lot less to talk about, and football's a lot less interesting of a sport, honestly.
Yeah, no, it's true. Especially, I mean, the referee incidents, I mean, every single weekend in the Premier League, there's always, actually, maybe this first weekend there wasn't anything major.
This might be the first time,
yeah. We're not talking about referees, but in previous seasons when we've done the weekend analysis, the review show on this podcast in a different version of this one.
Well, I guess Chelsea fans are complaining about referees, but
that's true.
I think Michael Oliver was a referee in that game, and I think he got all those calls right.
It was fair. But then again, the Chelsea fans might disagree with us, but I thought that was fair. But yeah, no, it's definitely kudos to MLS for being a trailblazer with this technology. My concern is just about implementation, and with Howard Webb at the steering wheel, I think they should be okay. But it's not going to be perfect. There's going to be mistakes along the way, as we've seen already. But it's also there's been some incidents where referees missed a call, and the video assistant referee, the VAR, did correct it. So to me, that's in ways to make the game better and fairer. That's a plus. So it's so hats off to MLS for that.
And let me actually say this about MLS in general. I have often been, maybe more than anyone in this country, critical of MLS for being very insular and very, very nativist and not going out and getting the best talent they can from abroad. This is a very notable exception to that, because I don't think there's anyone better from my perspective, unless you get Kalina out of retirement and bring him in.
Luigi, right?
Yeah, to do this.
Yeah.
And they went out and absolutely got the best person they could in the global game from my standpoint. Now, again, that's maybe me being kind of watching more British football, English football than anything, and perhaps there's a referee in other parts that could do the same thing. But I think that this speaks highly of MLS's seriousness about this particular issue, that they went out and brought Howard Webb over, when in so many other cases they've just promoted from within and been very insular in their thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it helps too that Howard Webb being able to speak English. So
I think that was
kind of the best English language referee or former referee out there to bring him in. So yeah, and I think in many ways too, I think MLS is probably looking at this thinking, okay, how can we be a trailblazer with this technology rather than, say, following everyone, where, say, goal line technology, 2 to 3 years after it's been implemented elsewhere, then bringing that online. So maybe this is a way for them, looking from a PR perspective too, is trying to, how do we see ourselves as a leader? And this is one way that they're there. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with the Bundesliga. We had with the German Super Cup, just one more thing to add, Kartik. In that German Super Cup too, the VAR system shut down. It stopped working. So was it Kimmich was offside, and they missed it. So because they weren't able to go back to the replay because the technology wasn't working. So it's not perfect by any means, and hopefully the Bundesliga will learn from it too.
Well, here again, I know we're going in circles here, and we need to wrap up, but a key distinction, and Webb was very, very adamant about this, a key distinction between the way they've implemented it in MLS, which I guess costs more money, and it's funny because MLS is cost conscious at times, but they're sending everybody to match sites. In Germany, it's one central feed in one central location. Mm-hmm. So maybe if there's another problem like there was in the Super Cup, Germany will revisit that decision. But, and of course, it's much easier to get around Germany, right? Train travel, and it's a smaller country than the United States. So maybe they'll revisit that decision. At the same time, perhaps it was good that happened in the Super Cup and not in an actual league game, which, of course, kicks off this Friday, and they're able to correct that.
Yep, very interesting stuff indeed, Kartik. And thanks for sharing all the insight on that and attending the actual meeting to share that with the listeners. So thank you everyone for listening. You can get a new episode of the World Soccer Talk podcast every Thursday. Every episode is released on SoundCloud, YouTube, Stitcher, iTunes, Audio Boom, and worldsoccertalk.com. If you like the show, share it with your friends on social media, and be sure to give us a review on iTunes. We'd appreciate it very greatly. Kartik, what should they do?
Enjoy your football.